Sounds like a happy country ball.
Mm-hmm. Mm. Nope. There we go. I do too.
Cool.
That's true. Uh-huh. Um,
Yeah, you are. I can see you. Probably I can't.
can you hear me? Artem, can you hear me?
I can hear you, but probably from the Google meeting.
That's
Oh, here we are.
oh. That sounds good. Maybe. Oh, wait. Now it's stopped altogether. Oh, there we go. Now it's working. Yes. uh, uh, uh. It was. Oh, yeah.
So we're continuing from Croatia point. Well, the war in like 1995, if I'm not mistaken. Actually, they joined EU after that war. Actually, that war happened like after Biden suggested to bomb Belgrade in the Senate. Like, and you can find a video of that. So that was about that war. And they joined EU probably around 2013, 2012 maybe, like about that time.
Mm-hmm.
Well, probably. But they were like a NATO member. They like got their NATO membership like way earlier, because usually NATO goes before the EU membership.
Mm.
Usually because not all countries in the EU are NATO countries and vice versa.
Mm-hmm.
Like Austria, for example. So Croatia is a good example for Ukraine.
Mm.
But Ukraine has also like other obstacles, like Poland, where maybe with some like restrictions it will be passed. But we have also a good neighbor of Moldova, and Moldova has its own Russian problem.
Mm.
And beside that, like no one in Brussels would consider like Ukraine membership in the European Union without Moldova, because European Union doesn't want like a hole inside of European Union. So Moldova goes like in a package with Ukraine. So and for that we need to like someone will fix Transnistria issue. And I have suspicions that that would be Ukraine, because Moldova, like, they have no like for Ukraine. If I remember that correctly, like Ukrainian government consider plans to seize the territory of Transnistria because they have enough of ammo for Ukrainian war with Russia. And I don't know what happened to those plans.
Mm.
So that like it depends, like considerably good amount of that Ukraine can use, because it's all the same, like post-Soviet like weapon that like that we use in this war. So so the like two big obstacles I would say for Ukraine would be Poland and Moldova,
Mm.
and like not mentioning even Russia. So let's consider that Russia will not be like an issue at some point. But like before that, I believe the NATO membership will come before the EU membership.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so like what I'm saying, like Ukraine will have its like struggle with Poland, with NATO, and NATO also not the easiest thing, because like for like being in NATO, Ukraine would be probably the military force with the most of experience in real war,
Mm.
in real like in modern war. So and it will be the only country in the EU with that experience, but not country in not the only country in NATO when it happens, because like I don't know about France, because like France has its like disagreement, has its own like business with Russia in Africa, so they compete for the same countries, and I feel that the quantity of like military men in Ukraine might do something in Africa as well against Russia. Hatred.
Yeah. Sure. I think increasingly you're going to see countries moving away from dependency on Russian natural resources. I know you kind of wanted to discount, that having access to oil and things like that, but Estonia had that ceremony a couple weeks ago where they plugged in the grid and moved away from, Russian power sources. So more and more that's probably going to happen.
Yeah, but also Estonia is a small country, so it
Sure.
requires like less effort for than for big countries, or bigger at least countries. So like the bigger
Yeah.
country is, the longer it may stay, like it may have like be dependent on Russian like natural resources for a while. But like as soon as Russia is replaced from the like trade, like for like natural resources, like among the European Union countries, like that's it. Like Russia has nothing to offer. Kremlin has nothing to offer, and they need to do something like with all this war mobilized like resource that they have at the moment. So it's people don't like switch suddenly to the normal like civil life when they used to earn like considerably big number of money
Sure.
doing like Warcraft.
So, I mean, I feel like the tides have fundamentally turned in regards to whatever stagnant bullshit was left over after the deals of the 90s, if that makes sense. So, before everybody had like a clear understanding of what was going on with Russia. But
I don't think
I don't want
like
to spoil it. Okay, fine. What do you think?
many people can understand now what's going on with Russia.
Well, but more people now understand than they did 10 years ago by a significant margin, right? If you consider pre-2014 Russia, Europe was more than happy to just turn a blind eye to all of the stuff that was going on. I can't think of any kind of significant political or economic actions that were held against it. Like they were still building pipelines. Russia was in the OSCE, but now all that stuff is politically unthinkable for countries that have not completely been consumed to the swamp. So basically everybody but Hungary, right? Um,
For now.
yes, but I don't think that's I don't know. That's ever since Russia invaded properly in 2022. I can't help but feel that they're on a one-way trajectory here. But we can talk about that. So I'm like I don't want to ruin stuff that's in my slides later. But
Okay.
in terms
Okay.
of accession criteria, let's talk
Yeah.
about
So
this.
yeah. So technically, like there are just two of them, but they're big and
There's
like the
just
scale of just democracy and free market economy. So and Ukraine need to be transparent enough to prove to the European Union like bureaucrats that we have both. So sounds easy, but it's not. So
well,
still like democracy, we still have, I believe, like big impact of Russian soft power in the European Union and in Ukraine as well. So it's still like people would believe like in many myths.
well, okay, but Ukraine's corrupt. Ukraine has issues with its legislature.
Yes, but like we can say it about any country. Any country is corrupt. It depends like
Yes.
how the system and institutions can fight that corruption. So this is the biggest problem, and the reforms suggested by the EU with different like let's call them like the prosecutor offices like that are just in progress right now, like actually make me feel that it will be the institution that will work like on itself when it starts working, like without any like interference from other like institutions inside of the country. So it doesn't work like now right now, but the EU is the demand of the EU is not just democracy and like corruption. The EU demand is like institutions, because even EU members are corrupt. So we have Hungary example. Sorry about that. Like I will not talk about. Like we have like probably Austria. We can say
Yes.
so. They have like they're like a good like bay for Russian money, but like lots of countries in the EU are like a good places to hide Russian monies. So what is corruption then? Like there is like people are corrupt. That's part of our nature. But response, this is the like the corruption isn't the big problem here. So how Ukraine deals with that corruption is a big deal.
Yeah. Well, you guys have dropped how many places in the corruption index in the last like 10, 15 years? Like quite a few. 20-ish, 20 some if I'm not mistaken. Whereas, situation in Russia and other places has just gotten worse. I forget the name of the index. The oligarchization one is an interesting thing. I wonder. Oh, that could be a whole podcast in and of itself. So, okay. A few days ago, I saw that Northern European states had put in a request to the EU to like tangibly accelerate the timeline. Do we feel that this is realistic? Because 2030 is a long way off. Like the war will be long resolved. Before then, presumably at this point, like even several of the world's most important leaders that are in place right now could very well be gone. So it's a very different economic and geopolitical climate. Is it reasonable to accelerate that timeline? Do we think? What would it require?
Well, if we consider, like in my opinion, if we consider the examples when the like such things happened, so when countries were accepted to the EU like without lots of demands, then they were like they implemented the eurozone currency, they were like a NATO membership, and this country is Greece. So the Greece was just accepted as is, without having even a common border with the European Union. So now it has. Now they have a border with Bulgaria, so Bulgaria to Romania, so Romania to like Hungary, like etc. But back then they didn't have a common border with the European Union, and they were fine. So that was the political decision to accept Greece as a member of the organizations that require some reforms from Ukraine, like another like candidates.
Okay, but
the same applies to Moldova, like Georgia, like Turkey, etc.
What are the big blockers to Ukraine? That'll be my last big question because then we have to transfer to another Google Meet. What are the big blockers for Ukraine, though?
Inside of the EU?
Sure.
Well, let's not talk about the war, because like it's self-evident. So Ukraine has, well, Ukraine got there some like documents to like fill in from the EU, and the part of it is done. So the right now like Ukraine moves with the like some sort of progress, and I don't think that will be that easy right now to implement. So there are some like the laws and legislation that Ukraine needs to implement. So, and from that point, I think that many things are like on pause because of the war. Even though the president has the majority in the parliament, like and legislation could be like implemented like within like literally like few days, few hours, so it wouldn't be a problem. But I think that the war is the biggest probably the war, the obstacle for that.
Yeah.
There's this conversation that we should have in public at some point about the differences between fundamental differences between American presidents and how our president should interact with our government systems, and how the Ukrainian president works in a parliamentary system.
Yeah, but Ukraine is a parliamentary republic.
Correct.
So the president is just a representative. Technically, it's like a manager. Now he's a bit more than a manager, right? So he's an immediate person.
Yes.
But generally speaking, the parliament and the government is more like powerful in Ukraine than the president. Like everyone knows about the president, but the president is not the like main character in here. The president is just representative. It's like it's a good face for the Time magazine.
Yeah, he can propose bills, right? He can still propose legislation.
Yes, he can propose, but to be frank, like any parliament member can do that. So
Yes.
every parliament member of Ukraine can be a sort of like minister of finance of Ukraine. With the proposals that they have for their like.
Does Zelensky have veto power then, or how does that work?
He has, but he has also his limitations. So if like the constitutional majority votes for anything, so he cannot use his veto power for, against that.
Okay.
Oh, but he's also in charge of the military. Is that right?
Yes. So he makes decision who is in charge of what.
Generals.
So he's generals, especially at the wartime, but like his power, like for like governance, is very limited inside of Ukraine. It doesn't seem so, but it is. So the government is way more powerful in Ukraine than the president institution.
Yeah, I was going to say, I've not heard of him doing anything to what would be our equivalent of an executive order or anything like that. Yeah.
No, he has no that power. So like he is like the foreign affairs, the military area. Those are his life responsibilities.
Okay. Oh, no. What is this showing me? Okay.
Oh yeah, there are 7 directions that we see in the table from.
Yes.
That Ukraine is going through, and it's still like in progress, because like we have also like not very transparent way of how our media works, and like all who benefits from that. So still like some like TV, like internet, like they belong to very like wealthy financial groups.
I mean, same thing in America. It's like 3 holdings that own most of the media landscape. So, you know.
Sure.
Yeah, but for the EU, it is an issue. They want to see at least some transparency. So.
Yeah, I didn't even know that. What is this last one here? Yeah, media legislation, national minorities. Yeah, the de-oligarchization is what we should maybe do a podcast on. That'd be interesting.
Yeah, and this is a big one, because we come to the definition. Who is an oligarch?
Oligarch, yeah.
Is Elon Musk an oligarch?
Yes.
According to Ukrainian law, he has a media, so he has impact.
It's X.
Well, yeah. The banks could come for that eventually. So
True.
Probably not already, because didn't he sell it to himself again?
Yes.
Right.
Yeah. So
yes, he has.
Without that, it would be fun when
yes,
a bank goes like a formal Twitter again.
He has access to that ultra rich method of not actually having to pay for anything, when you can have loans made on collateral rather than liquidity. So it's like, what? That's completely busted. But
it's oligarchy.
I mean, it's just finances for the ultra rich. That basic loopholes that don't make any sense. If you're so rich that you don't need cash anymore, which is
well, you can live in negative numbers in somebody's heads, so they don't exist. It's like money printing technically.
No, it's all about demonstrated market value. You don't have to have a single dollar printed. You just have to have like assets on paper.
Yeah, access to credit.
Yeah. I'm going to very quickly make a new Google Meet and invite you guys to it.
All right.
Sure.
I'll be right back.
We'll be right back after this commercial break. See, this is where it'd be great to have like a pause, and we'd have like a stupid
Yes.
advertisement. Anyway, all right. I'll share this with you guys in Discord and get out of here. See you in a sec.
Mm-hmm.
All right. One sec.
Stop sharing. Goodbye. Bonk. Bonk. Presents. We are learning. All right. Thank you to everybody. We don't have a commercial break right now, but I appreciate the patience that you exhibit as we try to figure out this stuff in technology that should be straightforward, but is not necessarily straightforward. And we're back.
Again.
Again. Your turnaround time. I didn't get to plug anything because we don't have any sponsors. But
Like I feel that we need some like about page on the website where we can
yeah.
like on which we can start each streaming, so we don't need to introduce ourselves a lot.
Yes, that would be grand.
Okay.
Let's write it. We could write a blurb. Ask Grok to write a blurb about us based off of 3 defining character traits and our favorite names.
Actually, not the worst idea to ask AI to write something for you while we are streaming.
Yeah.
True.
SpongeGar is a great meme. I love the wide Zelensky meme. That one was more popular at the beginning of the proper work. But so anyhow, I can't say that word. The removal of oligarchs is an important thing.
The oligarchization.
Well, I mean, who was the guy from Dnipro that was his assets are frozen in the States?
Oh, I remember hearing about that.
Kolomoisky.
Kolomoisky. It was just another K. What I keep thinking.
Yeah.
Yeah. Kolomoisky's out of the play. I would think that with the integration with the EU and the relative standardization of prices that then have to come with that would kill some of the subsidies that keep the oligarchs propped up. So
especially in the energy
yes.
sector, because it's the energy sector like technically belongs to only one person in Ukraine.
Yeah.
And he's not very public, and he doesn't like he survives every government like that Ukraine has.
Those two things are
like,
probably related.
Yeah.
But also because I mean the energy exports to Europe will be also, inevitable as well. Ukraine just exports energy to Europe now, in certain days even. And as soon as the Zaporizhzhia plant comes back and things like that, there's no reason to think that
it will.
Yeah.
It will, because the biggest plant are on the continent right now.
Yeah.
So it's just inevitable that
Mhm.
will export the energy to the EU.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
Anything else to say about this?
The number 7 point is probably about the Hungary and Poland and Romania and all our neighbors within the EU already. So minorities and Hungary is always unhappy with minorities, or at least it's the direction they play when they disagree or want something else.
I mean,
from Ukraine.
Hungary might just lose its EU voting rights. So
we'll see. Everybody's happy with them.
Well, no, but I mean, to the point, then we can get into this too. Europe is just so insanely slow to do anything of importance or value that I understand why people are frustrated with it. Because I've also always been frustrated with Europe. But we can advance the slides.
Yoo-hoo.
Yeah.
Portugal.
Yeah. Portugal. Okay. So in order to understand tomorrow's EU, we have to understand tomorrow's NATO, because especially given the security state of the European continent and the recent change in posture from the United States, two fundamental realities. Number one, the U.S. has bankrolled a huge amount of NATO, a disproportionately large amount of NATO for a long time, and has very justifiable gripes with Europe about that. This has been going on for decades. This is nothing new. Reality number two about that equation is that Europe has had years to invest into this properly, and they have failed to do so. And by investing into this properly, I mean not just throwing more money at their own defense budgets or at NATO defense budgets, but it's much more about creating infrastructure that would then be supported, by that I mean defense manufacturing and military production largely. That when push comes to shove, they actually have a defense force. They have things that they can call on because the EU does not have a standing army. NATO has a set number of troops. The EU does not. So ostensibly here, and very realistically, if which was in an alternate universe where Poland is the adjacent country next to Russia and there is no Ukraine, most of Europe would already be lost. And this is the reality of the situation because the Poles would have fought like hell. We all understand this. The other side of that is that Europe would have done all the hemming and hawing that they did with Ukraine, and you would have seen just the Russians bowl over Poland and into Germany, where they would have met up with all their spies, and it would have just been terrible. So that leads us to the third reality. So Europe is now, facing this reality after way, way, way too many years of doing this, which leads us to point number three, which is the United States absolutely threw the baby out with the bathwater in regards to the the evolution of their obligations with NATO and their interactions with the European continent as a whole. As a whole, I have to think that this is partially motivated by to a certain degree, I think Russia's involved, certainly with players such as Elon Musk, who has been very actively, fervently anti-EU, although now he's back because he's desperate for now he's back because his companies have fallen. So he's saying things like, "Oh, we need to have free trade restored between the Americans and the Europeans." It's like, well, yeah, obviously, fucking, you need a 180 on that after you realize that the Europeans are going to fine you 8 billion euros for the shit that you pulled with your data. But that's another story. So partially Russian influence, partially a lack of understanding of how Europe works and what it is, and and three, like I said, a justifiable frustration with their inaction. So I have no idea. Like this is from Signalgate. I have no idea why people think that America's funding Europe. I see the NATO side of that, where okay, the argument is America pays X amount for NATO, Europe pays Y amount, X is much greater than Y, this is disproportionate. We all understand this. I have no idea, and I don't think anybody else knows what else is going on about this. Europe and the United States had very positive trade relations, generally speaking, for a very long time.
We did.
We buy champagne from them, we buy wine from them, we buy all sorts of shit that we cannot make in name or just logistically in our own country. And so I have no idea what that narrative is coming from. And it, we already scrape so much talent from them anyways, is the other side that people don't talk about. Salaries in the United States are extremely high for a lot of skilled work as opposed to the EU. So, I mean, software developers will make 5x at least, Artem. You can correct me on those numbers, but,
It
there's
depends
nobody...
on the country. On the country of origin of the developer, and
Yes.
also on the like states where they're heading to. So,
But the potential is there to receive a massive increase to your salary just by merit of you leaving Europe and going to the United States with the same amount of talent, right?
yeah. So if you're moving, for example, from France to California, you can make even 10x, I believe.
Yeah, right. So this is insane. This is crazy shit, right, that we're talking about. And this is partially because America has a different work culture. It's partially because Europe has, I want to say, just a less innovative environment, a less rewarding environment for businesses kind of on the whole. the Americans kind of go too far in the opposite direction where we don't have things like, adequate maternity, paternity leave in a lot of places. Healthcare cost weights, like our healthcare system's fundamentally broken, and. So it's, give and take. But point is, there's been disproportionality on both sides. And one place that really hates the shock therapy treatment is the defense sector. So contracts, procurement, requisition, testing, delivery, and maintenance is a hugely complicated, insanely overblown bureaucratic process for anything. It is 0% surprising that, let's ignore all the fundamental flaws of the F-35, which is great. For certain things, it's pretty cool. In certain ways, it's a flying trash can that's impossible to maintain. And at the best of times, it's impossible to maintain. No, none of those goals have been hit here. I think right now, if the U.S. went to war tomorrow, I think only about 50% of the fleet is currently air ready. The goal was 75%. And the parts and maintenance for this thing are so expensive that it's easier for the Pentagon to procure and buy new parts from scratch every time something breaks than wait for the manufacturer, which in this case is Lockheed, to actually repair anything. Yes, Artem.
You said like the states go like to the war with whom?
Doesn't matter.
It does, because if it's not the EU, like God forbid, like so EU has some countries that can substitute like aircraft in the time of need.
Yeah, but we're not gonna. I mean, I think the question you're trying to ask is who would we go to war with that would require. I mean, we're already at war with the Houthis, if you want to call it a war, right? We struck them. Is this like an isolated special military operation, or is this a war against Iran? I don't know. But point being, so the blowback from all of this, what it has forced Europe to do is take a very sober look at its own kind of inadequacy and say, we have half a dozen real defense companies whose stocks are now exploding through the roof. I regret not buying Rheinmetall stock back in the day, but it's the fact that I don't know what you expect, right? It's you go to Europe, you say, we're going to turn shit off. We're going to discontinue things. The F-35 is so tightly protected right now that it is impossible to autonomously operate without American maintenance on it. And that's because the DoD/Pentagon cannot even maintain the aircraft without contractors from Lockheed and its subsidiaries to fix the fucking airplane, because that whole process has been chalked up to basically acquisition malpractice, right? Because Lockheed doesn't release full maintenance manuals for it because it's proprietary to Lockheed. It's not actually an American government aircraft. So, and stuff like this, where you have like, the DoD wants to requisition $1.7 trillion worth of these F-35s. 1.3 trillion of that is maintenance alone. So you can effectively kill switch the aircraft by just bringing home your American maintenance guys and saying, yeah, we're not giving you parts anymore. So it's not a button, like people were talking about a backdoor in the software, but I don't think there's credibility to that necessarily, because that would just be the stupidest fucking thing in the world to have an airplane that you can remotely turn off. But you can logistically have a kill switch. And as we've seen with the whole intelligence, the stopping with the intelligence sharing, the pausing of shipments and arms for things like HIMARS and stuff like that, we have an unstable political climate right now that is being emanating from Washington. Therefore, Europe is saying, well, shit, we need to kind of look inward. And what they've done with that is, as of March, what's called Rearm Europe. I think it's now called Reassess Europe. And it's very European, and it's very ugly, and it's very poorly defined. But broadly, what it means is that Europe is ready to put, I think I saw 800 billion euros was the latest one, into the revitalization and boosting of its own defense infrastructure. So this is not anything that's going to happen soon, but we're talking about Rolls-Royce factories, revving up to make tank engines. We're talking about all sorts of materiel generation, ammunition generation, all this stuff that they should have started doing ages ago, because then they would have actually got some return on investment like the US does with its own DoD Ukraine aid kind of cycle we have. So, and it's the primary impetus for this is the Trump administration stance towards Ukraine aid and the trade relations between U.S. and the United States, or the U.S. and Europe vis-a-vis NATO, which is just outrageous, right? The fact that they decided something this big in 60 days, I don't remember seeing anything that big. Steve, Artem, please correct me. But,
No.
they looked at 60 days of behavior and said, okay, we're going to put €1 trillion into something now.
Yeah.
And they have it now. So like when
Yes.
they need something, they recognize that they
Mhm.
have resource. So
Yes.
Sure.
so this is a good part of it actually. So we see that all these like narratives about like weak Europe is not like is not relevant for for
Mhm.
dangerous situation
Yes.
like
At
this.
least narratively, right? I'm waiting to see if the rubber's going to hit the road here. And, a lot of these plans, in fairness to this reassess Europe thing, it's very vague. It's not
Mhm.
strictly defined. It's very much, we have the money, we have a general idea of what we want to do, but we don't have a sense of which countries are going to take on the factories, which countries are going to take on the manufacturing burden, what the quotas for those things are going to be. So it is, I think, a very good first step. But yeah, it's very weird when I see a world where the Americans are surrendering to the Russians without a fight, and the French, are saying we're going to put French boots to the ground to go ensure a peacekeeping force in Ukraine. It's like, okay, we're in the silliest timeline.
There are so many reasons for that.
Yes.
For
So,
that saying, I'm not saying like action, like for that statement
which statement?
Mhm.
of Macron.
Oh, well,
So
why?
they're sending troops to Ukraine.
Why is
Well,
that?
Oh.
that's politics inside France, I'd
Well,
say.
that
So
that
now they secured the part with Marine Le Pen. So
yes,
that's a positive thing,
yes. Okay.
I wanted.
Well,
I was just gonna. Sorry to interrupt. Take
no,
a
do it.
second to think about the hardware, the military hardware that has been given to Ukraine thus far from EU member countries, not considering the US right now, but a lot of things like the Challenger tanks from the UK and
Yeah.
a lot of the other Jeeps, Humvees, weapons, etc. were not their latest technology. Just like kind of what we sent wasn't the latest. And my understanding is a lot of that had been in storage, and it was a clearing out, if you will, of either buying new requisitions from the US, which I think they're increasingly going to move away from, or opening the door to innovation, which is what we're kind of talking about here. I think, the F
Yes.
35 being a fifth generation fighter, kind of on the tail end of the fifth generation of those fighters, and they're beginning development for the sixth generation fighters, which I think should debut within the next 5 years or so. So they're looking introspectively, I think. And I liked your point, Ben, about what countries are going to look at manufacturing, who's going to look
Yeah.
at innovation. I don't think we're going to see a discounting of partnerships with U.S. companies like General Dynamics or Lockheed Martin, but we might see equivalent because again, I think their technology and their patents, their IP is, you know, still very important to a lot of European partners. But I think we're going to see more
Yeah.
startups and more, what we call DARPA funding, right, which is
Yeah.
advanced defense projects there. Uh, so give it a couple of years, and we're going to see, a lot more. But also the other thing to keep in mind is, like a long-term thing, after the current occupant leaves, and if we get someone from the other party, will collaboration start again? That's something to think about too.
Yeah.
you know but I'll pause there.
No, those are great points. And more than anything else, we have to come back to the core concept of money talking. And right now, there's a lot of money in Europe talking. more and more I'm seeing tweets where countries are going to are foregoing American weapon systems and IP. You know, we could have a separate thing about like to what extent the industrial components of these, like for parts and for engines and things like this, are intertwined between America and Europe. But once I forget which country it was, they just said straight up like we're not ordering F-35s. We're gonna buy whatever the Swedish one is. I forget.
Gripen.
Yeah, right.
Swedish Gripen.
When we were previously talking about back in the day about Ukraine being the best advertisement for American mil tech because the Europeans were just buying it left and right, in orders of magnitude higher scale than America was supplying these things to Ukraine. So, the ROI in this is outrageous. That's also going to disappear, right? So there's going to be, it's not even just the dissolution of existing contracts. It's very much just the, I don't know what the business term is, but lost projected revenue that just evaporates. And while this is all happening in parallel with America's biggest contractors, I mean, these are companies that, like Lockheed Martin, gets more billions in dollars in government contracts per year than the entire State Department, right? The State Department budget is less than the contracts, which is just all of the ambassadors, all of the embassies, and even something that big as Lockheed Martin can't get out of the way of this tsunami of BS that's happening. So, and fun fact too, the CIA stopped the head of Rheinmetall from being assassinated by the FSB. That's also a pointer that the Russians understand this is a serious problem because Germany is very much like the Russian heartland of Europe in a lot of ways, and the Germans are here to make money on dead Russians. However, so we have to get to the however part. Russia's soft power is certainly not without its victories. Here's a short list that I could find. And for people that are watching at home, this is where Russian influence lives in Europe and is strongest in Europe. For people also watching at home, regardless of whether or not you think NATO started the war, initiated the war in any way, I think we can fundamentally agree that Russia's not here to end the war. So, we're those people now, by the way, too, because if U.S. is pulling out of NATO and NATO started the war, therefore Russia continues the war, whose fault is it now? That's a fun counterpoint. But yes, so you think of countries like Orban that have been functionally, I saw there were protests and things, but I think for the purposes of this discussion, we can say that it's been completely co-opted by a pro-Russian Kremlin puppet dictator that very well could single-handedly lead his country out of the EU with disastrous consequences for the Hungarians. There's no version of this for them that ends well if they leave the EU.
Sure.
Fico, Slovakia, he was riding a populist wave in 2023, got elected, stopped all military aid supplies to Ukraine. Austria, I don't know, Artem, what you think of my description, but
I want to go back to Fico real quick.
Sure.
The assassination attempt last year was really interesting because the assailant allegedly had pro-Russian ties. And if I recall correctly, it was set up that way to make it look like, Russia, oh, we don't have anything to do with this person in the EU. And I believe he survived with some injuries, but the allegations are that, Russia backed him, but not publicly backed him, and then wanted someone to make it look like, oh, it's some deranged terrorist or something. He's not put up by us, type of thing. I don't know if that's true, but that was interesting to see because you don't see very many high-profile assassination attempts of EU leaders. I thought
that would be that's a classic Russian playbook.
Yeah.
So
well, guys, if we Google right now that the Fico ties to Italian mafia, we would find pretty much lots of interesting materials. So
why do you know this? How do you know this?
Just read somewhere. I don't remember this.
Okay.
Just passed by at some point.
Passed it by.
So, and like Orban came in to power when he was very pro-Western, very liberal, pro-European Union politician. So he wasn't piece of Orban as he is right now. So, and Orban and Fico now they are sort of like pals towards like Ukraine, but like speaking from their like political perspective, they're on the different like sides of their how do you call it, like political spectrum. Yeah.
Okay. God, you just pull shit like this out. Like, how do you not know this? Like, what? I mean, I don't know that. Okay. But yeah, the broad takeaways from this slide are Hungary is completely compromised at this point. Austria is kind of one of the last pockets of Europe that really wants to suck down Russian LNG and oil. That's another great thing that I don't know if you guys saw the price of oil lately. You should definitely read up on that one because that's hilarious too. Cyprus is basically just an offshore for everything happening that Russians want to do outside of and not be strictly associated with a Russian business entity. Serbia is a ethnic pocket of Russians because they're the same Eastern Orthodoxy as Russians. And you have people that have influxed since after the war, the proper war started, full war. The Coca-Cola refugee types that were fine with Crimea, and they were fine with Donetsk, they were fine with Luhansk, but then as soon as, they couldn't buy Pepsi in Russia anymore, that was kind of the breaking point. As well as all of the bullshit of the 90s with, the genocides in Kosovo, the ethnic Muslims, and then the Albanians, and everything where all these FSB people, like Sergei Girkin, jumped in the 90s to help sow chaos that persists to this day because of this perceived ethnic brotherhood. So people, that's an interesting takeaway. Is if you want to know what like a brother nation to Russia looks like, Serbs are a good example. Like Orthodox Christian Serbs are a good example. And I'll let you chat GPT what their life was like for a lot of the 1990s. And then just Germany, by the nature of it being split in half during the Soviet Union, there's a shit ton of Russians around. Like 2 million Russian speakers.
Wow.
In Germany, yeah. You can't walk around in Germany without hearing it. It's infuriating. So I guess quickly, tables. This is something that you can screenshot if anybody wants to screenshot it. But specific politicians that have likely bought into the Kremlin Kool-Aid or have been bought by the Kremlin to different extents and for different reasons. We have the sources in this slides that we'll make public after we do all this. So some of these people like Schultz are just weenies, I think. I don't necessarily think Schultz is owned by the Kremlin. I just think he's I don't know, I'm trying to think of the word here. I just think he's like a marshmallow with no clear moral code.
That's a good way of putting it.
Yeah, trying to assume ignorance and not malice, right? Macron, I don't know what he was trying to do with the power play of like calling Putin in the early days of the war and like going to visit Putin.
Oh yeah.
And then he was like he got sat down at the big ass table with them and all that.
I remember that.
Yeah, that was all happening, and then kind of Putin looked at him and said, "Yeah, I'll stop doing it." And then Bucha happened. So
it didn't work out. He stopped. Like didn't work out for Macron. What he did, and he just stopped.
Correct.
Yeah.
After very publicly eating shit. So, like, maybe that's partially why. So it's a gray area, right? He's also come back. He's had this more firebrand rhetoric recently. But again, once, I'll be happy to welcome French troops in the streets of Lviv, let them keep going east. But until that happens, we'll, he's still in a bit of a gray area there. Who are these other people? Yeah, Croatia. The Croatian one's funny because he actually got he became a pariah after opening his mouth. Like, actively disowned by the entire Croatian government.
Wow.
And the thing is too. Here's a question for you. It seems there's the counterpoint of like, oh, you guys blame everything on Russia. Everything's Russia's fault, blah, blah, blah. And the argument to that is it's usually extremely obvious because it's not subtle when these things happen. So maybe the actual operations, like the FSB is operating with incredible subtlety, but like the Viktor Orbáns of the world, not subtle. Marie Le Pen's of the world, not subtle. This Zoran Milanovic, same kind of thing. Just like, the Tim Pools of the world and the Elon Musks of the world. These people are not in any way trying to, like, I guess, leave room for some kind of doubt. Ukraine is not a democratic country. It's just a verbatim Kremlin talking point that is objectively not able to exist in the real world of rational thought.
What are we putting it?
No questions about Russia, though.
Yeah.
Well, we're not going to talk about the absolute lack of moral clarity here. It's just
there are literally people in Russia who was born when Putin was a president, and they died when he is still a president.
Yes.
Wow.
On Ukrainian soil.
Jeez.
But yeah, with the Robert Fico thing, he's at least like it only prolongs the war in like like the escalation management peacenik bullshit. That's at least subtle, and I think that's much more actively destructive, right? But I just don't. I guess idiots are some idiots are more useful than others. I don't know what the takeaway is from for purposes of like Russian intelligence operations and co-ops. I don't know. I don't know. I do not know. So that's just that.
Macron did a 180 to some extent, didn't he? He's pretty pro Ukraine now. Is that fair to say? After he backtracked on Russia. I don't know, to some extent, maybe not.
I don't know. It's a good question because he, that was him early days. He was saying stuff like, "We cannot humiliate Russia."
Totally.
Which is
yes. From my perspective, he plays not only he plays like Russian game. So it's not about Ukraine. He plays Russian game because when he goes to Putin to sit over the like long sheet table, so probably he talks not only about Ukraine but also about the collaboration in Africa. So Africa is a big deal for France because they're still there and they still try to support the states who would like to be democracies, and Russia is a rival over there. That's why like Ukrainian experience with Russians would be applicable in Africa for France.
Okay.
Makes sense.
So it's all about a bit bigger picture. So Ukraine is important to France because France, like with their like business ties, like in agriculture all across the Europe, they have like big deal over there. So they don't need Russia like at their borders as well. They understand because it will hurt business.
And this comes back to the whole like lack of subtlety here, and why the naivety behind any art of the deal with Putin. Because we could have a separate discussion about whether or not Putin's still like holding on to some semblance of his sanity. But his most successful years is when he was fence sitting, right? And playing every side at the same time. Whereas him publicly making Macron eat shit is not a good strategy. Or, I mean, maybe it's not now because Macron's just saying, especially after the whole Trump thing, right? Let's move past the Trump thing where Trump's like, we'll have, a peacekeeping force. And Russia's like, you're not having a peacekeeping force.
Yeah.
At all. What the hell's wrong with you? And they're like, we're going to draw the lines. And Russia's like, no, we're taking every ounce of the Zaporizhzhia Oblast and all these other things that we obviously haven't even come close to claiming in terms of territory. So they can do that dance with certain people, like they're doing right now with Trump. But they, you know, you can't do that with Macron. Macron and the British just looked at him and it's like, you know, we're going to put in, and that's great. I'm really delighted, honestly, at that response. And it's hilarious. But this was an interesting one, and we can kind of start to wrap things down here. So the fulcrum of Russia's intelligence operation in the EU, right? So the influence, the social media operations, the info ops, the migration style, where you have these millions of Russians that have now emigrated to the EU and they're integrating, which they're not. They're doing parades about how great their country is when they bomb, and you know they just threw a missile into a building that killed 9 children 2 days ago, and yet they're unapologetic. But the biggest, I think, greatest defense that the EU has against this, and that best plays into Ukraine's hands, is this like general EU having its shit together type sentiment. Map on the left. Not surprising to me that the most galvanized countries against the Russians and therefore for the EU are the ones bordering the Russians. This is not surprising to me. And so this is a really interesting article. It's in the links. So for people that are watching, or if you guys want to read it, they have a breakdown by factor. You can hover over these maps. It's really nice. But the factors are for pro EU sentiment are like, you know, the public feels attached to the EU. The public trusts it. The public feels, you know, there are no major anti-European political forces in play. Things like this. The red maps are Russia-friendly government, people that have historical grudges against Ukraine, people that have a cultural affinity with Russia like the Serbians do, low media freedom, low media literacy, right? So these things that are not even, you know, you could objectively say having a cultural affiliation with Russia isn't necessarily a negative. Low media literacy is almost always a negative, right? So, this is the battleground that will, in any case, I think, decide all of these things that maybe we were talking about earlier, like Ukraine's accession timelines. Because a lot of these, the thing that's interesting too is that a lot of these people have like the solid blue ones, like Poland and Austria and some other people there are also on the red map because they're, I guess, middle ground. So I'm curious as to what Poland, like Poland, large Ukrainian population, historical grudges against Ukraine. Well, okay. Low media freedom in Poland. Heated national political context and major cost of living concerns. Which is also interesting because that's just a lever for, you know, Russian influence operations. Worked in Brexit, works for the last election. But yes. So I don't know where I was going with this. This is just a fun map. I like visuals. So I guess to this point, what I was trying to say is the Ukrainian accession to the EU has to be reliant on the EU getting itself together, so the map becoming more blue. I don't see, given the recent, you know, the pro-European stuff that's going on, the anti-Musk sentiment, the anti-Trump administration sentiment, JD Vance basically like doing a drive-by of Greenland. I don't see the map becoming redder anytime soon. Cautiously.
Hopefully.
What do you guys think?
I don't either in a general sense. I think that it's very, you made a good point about being very country specific, and especially those that have a border with Russia or are closer. I think the Baltics in particular are one of the most consistently pro-Ukraine blocs, even though there are, as I understand, a significant amount of Russian speakers in those countries. But you know, they were the first to leave the Soviet Union, so I think it's hard to say, but The UK also, I'll just say, is an interesting one because they've been pretty steadfast in their support of Ukraine, and I know they're not really indicated because they're not EU. But even when the political party changed hands, they were pretty steadfastly committed too. I just wanted to make that point.
Yeah.
Looking at the red part of the map, that's Bulgaria and Hungary being in dark red, I believe. That's interesting. I don't know.
I can check the thingy.
You don't hear about Bulgaria a whole lot in terms of their
What do they really do?
support. Yeah, that's interesting.
But like Bulgaria supports Ukraine a lot.
Mm-hmm.
So
Makes sense.
They have cultural affinity with Russia, high levels of distrust towards the EU, low media freedom and literacy, heated national political context, and major cost of living concerns.
the poorer country, the bigger distrust to the EU.
Yes.
True. Yeah.
So this is
point.
yeah. Well, with Trump administration, like I hope that Europe will pull itself together, like in terms of defense, like I don't finances, like whatever problem they have, they think, but all the problems like considered as the problems within EU, those are not problems for many countries. So they have like some deficit like bigger than 2% of their GDP. It's not a problem. So like that's also definition. We will go to definition of the problem.
Yeah.
What is the problem? But Europe is a very populous continent and very developed continent. So they have all the chances to handle many things on their own. And I hope that like let's bring some like full stack country in terms of the defense, like the France, like Sweden, they have the full cycle of manufacturing of their own, like aircraft, like ship, like and air tanks and everything. They have like Germany has a good potential like in that direction also. So they're capable of like re-establish probably their own manufacturing, which will fix many of their problems because it's like taxes, like working places, etc. So this is a good chance to go on media through the crisis of like I don't know, adoption, like adjusting to the like first waves of the like inconsistent like money streams that they need. But like on media it would look like great and people would not feel that much, because like the longer war is going on, the more people adjust to the situation in the world.
Yes.
Because now we don't think that North Korea is something abnormal. We understand that it shouldn't exist, but we just all go along with that. Okay, we have two Koreas, so it's fine.
No, it definitely should not exist.
Yeah, we understand that just
that's true.
Yeah.
I've heard that.
The crazy things like this, they shouldn't, but they do.
I think there's a degree where systems like that are eventually going to collapse upon themselves. The question is, where will they do damage until they collapse? So
it depends on China also.
Yes,
true.
But yeah, so that was kind of an interesting one where you have, there's a degree of correlation between where Russian populations are, where Russian information operations have been successful, and where people hate the EU because it's in Russia's immediate interest to make the EU weak as a competing sphere of geopolitical influence, which is why I like these maps. And again, I would highly encourage people to go and just look at the little factors and stuff like that. It's an interesting piece of data as well put together. Grain of salt, like with anything else, but it was cool. This is basically my final point. So, broadly speaking, what the EU and Ukraine separately gained the benefit from the other by having this accession, right? And or generally increased cooperation. This is a table. I'm not going to read it, but broad strokes conclusions are that when it comes to actual iterative defense production, especially for smaller, I guess, what do you want to call it, smaller scale materiel and weapon systems. So drones, FPV, loitering munitions, things of that nature, and anti-drone systems and the electronic warfare mentioned there. Ukraine right now is the best of the best. I cannot think of anybody else in the world that is operating with more success in a military theater than the Ukrainians are. Their production has increased over 100 times since 2022. And my understanding, just based off the limited reading I'm doing, is that drones right now are the most decisive. Like 70% of all Russian casualties are Ukrainian drones, which is a very significant number because, it's a testament to Ukrainian stick-to-itiveness and innovation. They had an artillery disadvantage, so they said, okay, well, we'll choose drones. And B, it's very much about the what was that, Artem? What was the thing that it's about the Ukrainians' ability to actually iterate over themselves, whereas Russia is, and there's another really good article that I linked in here about why Russia will lose the war of attrition here, because Russia's in a much worse position in terms of economy, manpower, and military production. But Russia, Artem, what was the thing that the Ukrainians published recently that doubled the operational range of their missiles from 20 to 40 kilometers? It was like 2 weeks ago.
Oh, wow.
Can't
Jeez.
remember. Can't recall.
But they're wreaking havoc. That's why they killed 2 Russian generals in the last 2 weeks.
Yeah.
I think
That's
partially. One of them was called the God of War. Like this, it's Putin announced another 160,000 people for a spring draft, but
wow.
they're losing. What is it? I've seen estimates of 1,500 people a day.
Wow.
1,500 people a day. That's is 45,000 soldiers per month.
That's crazy.
Well, yeah, that's insane.
I also want to make the point about the not only their capacity but their innovation too. And I know this happened right after the full-scale invasion, but the way they sunk the Moskva ship, right, was to send out an airborne drone to distract its targeting system. I think you all know this. And then they had launched a missile underwater that's a Ukrainian innovation that apparently Russia had no awareness of. So it sank kind of underwater. They called it an explosion, I guess. But what a great approach, right? Distract it. Okay, we have a set, and I think they use the same technology on the Kerch bridge. I believe that at some point was hit with didn't destroy it, but was damaged.
It's a big
So
bridge.
these water-based drones are a great innovation out of Ukraine.
Yeah, and it's also interesting to your point as well, Steve, that Europe and other people are now coming for a lot of these basic systems, right? So I don't know if you saw that Amazon's now coming after Starlink, right?
Yeah.
Or that the Europeans are also now looking at this and say, oh, well, Starlink is not reliable. We need our own Starlink. So,
right.
Yeah. Not only Starlinks, Windows for governmental agencies as well. So
yeah.
Europe got its own distributive of like Fedora Linux.
That's pretty funny.
And they don't want to rely on Azure or GitHub.
How could you? It could be tariff. What if you just tariff it? If you tariff,
right?
Yes,
cloud storage already costs like $1 billion, $1 trillion.
Yeah.
Yeah, but considering that, I expect lots of new these IT farms in Europe that just for data storage for governmental organizations, just to be backed up in case of, I don't know, another trade war with the states or anyone. Doesn't matter with whom. Just business inside of the European Union.
Yeah.
Well, this could be the shock in the arm for European, not even just defense. Like I mostly know about defense stuff, but that the Europeans need to say, okay, maybe it should. How long does it take in Germany to open a business? Like what, 60 days or something stupid like that? Where it's like we founded this podcast in like an hour and a half. So this is
a good point. Huh?
Yeah, but it's just
you have shorter words, just
shorter
than
words
in German language.
I mean, they could also not. We have this thing in English. It's called a sentence. that is, supposed to convey semantic meaning based off of a certain ordering of these things called words in certain order. If the Germans prefer to just like make that a word, then that is completely on them.
They have
There's no
very long
reason.
words.
There's no reason to have a word like Fehlerstätte-Darmsprache-Gesellschaft am bitch and stand line. There's no reason to have that word. But anyway, it's like the
Welsh
volcanosis
language.
thing. Well, it's like the silicon volcanosis thing that we have in English that we use ironically,
Right.
but that's how they actually construct
Wow.
concepts. So,
Jeez.
but so yeah, I guess to wrap up my slides, the Ukrainians have a certain degree of stuff that they have to get through, but there's quite a bit of standing. Ukraine primarily would benefit from easier access to EU investment. EU benefits from the diversification and experience of Ukrainian defense, certainly agriculture, the mobility of the Ukrainian labor force, energy, and things like that. I would be very interested to see how, if this, snap of the fingers in the Ukraine EU tomorrow, how the Ukrainians would handle Russians who are also EU citizens.
Mm,
You know what I mean?
that's
There's
a
2
good
million
question.
Russian speakers living in Germany that would then have the ability to go to Ukraine, ostensibly, but that's a different discussion about what Ukraine should do after the war's over with Russians and people that,
Not only Ukraine.
Well, Ukraine is going to do it first, and they're going to do it best.
Yes, of course, but
So, yeah, I would love to see that wall. I will love to see that wall, but it's, I guess, globally speaking, I've been surprised that Europe got a shit together for the first time in my living memory, certainly. But I don't know if Steve, you certainly read more than I do on this. Artem, I don't know where you get your information from.
He knows it
You might
all.
have made like a pact with an eldritch god, but I don't know. Yeah.
No, I agree. I think, maybe that's a silver lining of the Trump administration's foreign policy is a cohesive and self-reliant Europe. Who would have thought?
Yeah.
It's funny. You had a screenshot from the signal text about having to bail out Europe again, but it seems like it's a great catalyst for them
Yeah.
to begin looking, inwardly and determining, oh, we don't need reliance. This is a sector we're
Yes.
gonna start and reforms, and they'll be ready for Ukraine, right?
Well,
I think they're gonna
the EU doesn't consider anything short term.
sure.
That's the thing too. This is not like Trump could just like pull the tariffs tomorrow and then everything's hunky dory and we go back to the way it was. This is never going to be the same ever again.
No, I agree with that, and that's a good thing.
Sure, I agree with it. For Ukraine and the EU, it very well could be a very, very good thing.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, it's for the United States and several of the systems that our fellow countrymen rely on, there's going to be times of what's the word I'm looking for? Times of famine, defense monies, and things like that.
That's a good point.
It is. I don't know. It's kind of interesting. Just kind of interesting. F-35 costs however many millions of dollars to operate. The Ukrainians can make a drone out of cardboard for 500 that kills a tank.
Yeah, right.
Because Ukrainians don't have time.
Yes.
Yeah.
For that, like they don't have like time to deal with like IP or like any shit like that. There is no they're happy when they don't hear like Russian missile out of their window.
Correct. Yeah. I was up for that was most of my night.
Yeah.
Was tracking the Kaliber missiles that were sent all over Ukraine. So like it's just it's just weird that I guess the United States, I guess we could argue about whether or not it's wartime or peacetime manufacturing. Because the EU, obviously, the EU defense sector at this point has been largely very slow, iterative R&D that is based on peacetime. But if Ukraine can further inject itself into the EU for that purpose, this explosively fast R&D battle-tested, intelligence-fueled defense
Mhm.
technology innovation that goes
Mhm.
directly into Europe.
Mhm.
Although it is interesting that there are certain American companies that have also directly plugged in, so like Shield AI and Dragoon.
Oh
Aero
yeah.
Environment opened an office in Kiev recently, actually. I made a list of
Oh
those.
okay.
So, I think there are certain defense companies that are maybe smaller, maybe that's it, that see where the winds of
Mhm.
change are blowing, and they're,
Mhm.
yeah, good things come out of Ukraine. So,
Mhm. I
yes.
agree with that.
Okay. That's all I got, lads. You guys got anything else?
I think we talked about Russia's goals for Europe in 2025 by looking a lot at its relations with the EU and you know the countries it's going to try and have a footprint in. Right, I think Hungary being the most notable of those, but hopefully we see more anti-Russian sentiment at not just a political level, but kind of a grassroots level. Just like again, I think Hungary is a great example. I don't think the everyone in Hungary, the citizenry, supports what
No.
Putin's doing. And they call him. I don't know if he's a dictator. I think he was democratically elected. Is that fair to say? You all might know that. I'm talking about Orban.
I can't
I
speak
don't
to
know
the
if he's
extent to
yeah,
which he's
he's
changed the
corrupt
system,
or not.
but I understand there's been some tweaking. And Hungarians that I've spoken to refer to him as a fascist, so it usually doesn't
Oh,
come
well,
without some sort of,
yeah,
yeah,
some truth behind it.
yeah.
I think that's fair to say. All
I
right.
mean,
Well,
so long as the U.S. aligns itself with Putin's narratives, the U.S. blowback is also Russia blowback.
exactly.
So,
That's right. Yeah,
yeah, womp womp.
But most of Russian assets are in Europe.
that's
No
true.
one's saying that they're not working. It's just,
Yeah.
So like Russia won't give up on Europe.
oh no, no, they
No.
won't.
So it will like exercises like every time every time they have a chance.
So the only game's on then.
Mm-hmm.
So
So it's gonna be interesting because for the European Union it's evident that they cannot use like Russian market anymore as they used to.
Mm-hmm.
So and they need to find something new or build something new even.
Mm-hmm.
So and if Ukraine is like considered as a European Union like
Mm-hmm.
member, like maybe
Sure.
some future, like maybe 5-10 years, which is not bad
Sure.
because I remember the times like 2004, and like Putin speaks to the press and saying like if Ukraine is ever accepted to the European Union, it will take them at least 20 years. So 20 years
Mm.
passed and nothing happened yet.
Right.
So 20 years wasn't that bad like time
No, I agree.
uh, uh, deadline. So, and for Europe, probably would be natural way to go somewhere like to Northern Africa. The new markets, like new developments, they need something to like invest.
Mm.
what? Have a different discussion about North Africa. We could have a good discussion
Yeah.
against
So
Russia versus
it's
China versus Western
Mm-hmm.
African
Mm-hmm.
development / exploitation. But
Right.
yeah, I don't know anybody else that's not France or Portugal that would have a vested interest in certain African.
why Italy would be interested because like the Italian like borders are always like abused with like illegal immigrants. So
Mm.
most of them are coming like through Italy.
Oh wow.
Italy's
So
a funny place.
Mediterranean region is quite a like still like big deal, with just not like in news.
Mm. Yeah.
All right, gentlemen, I'll wrap it up there. To
Yeah.
anybody watching the
That was
stream,
good.
thank you. All right, yeah. Thanks for the patience. Appreciate it.